Hello and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining this webinar on One Plan for One Planet, the new strategy of the One Planet Network. I am Cecilia Lopez-Ciroyo, the coordinator of the NYC Secretariat, and I'm joined here by Sophie Clausen, the monitoring and reporting analyst.
Hello, everyone.
So as you saw from the invitation to this webinar, the webinar is really about the new strategy as an opportunity for us all to come together and to deliver on the objectives of on SDG 12, on the objectives of the NYC, and really to launch this new 5-year phase of the One Planet Network. As many of you know, we've gone through a comprehensive stock-taking at midterm of the progress that has been made across the One Planet Network, identifying some of the trends, the challenges, and the opportunities that lie in the next 5 years. So we will walk you through in this overview, in this presentation, on how we reached to certain conclusions of the strategy, and then we will look at the strategy and what the strategy really identifies as key priorities over the next 5 years across the One Planet Network, so across countries, across organizations. The presentation will be about 30 to 40 minutes long, and then it will be followed by Q&A with all of you. Feel free in the meantime to chat in any questions that you may have during the webinar session, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So this said, let me start. So just to put it back into perspective and give a little bit of the background also as to certain choices that were made in terms of the prioritization that you find in the strategy. So first and foremost, Agenda 2030. The 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production is really anchored in Agenda 2030, and I think this has been a thread throughout the stock-taking at midterm and the development of the strategy. So we have, in particular, we're anchored on SDG 12 and records, of course, in Target 12.1, which calls for the implementation of the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production. But we're also referencing another important goal, Goal 8, and in particular Target 8.4, Goal 8, which looks at decent work and economic growth, and Target 8.4, which really highlights the role of the network that has formed to implement the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production, the role that we can have in terms of decoupling economic growth for environmental degradation, so the longer-term vision of the work that we're all doing. Of course, the third point around Agenda 2030, that also was a thread throughout the discussions at midterm, was really this concept that sustainable consumption and production and SDG 12 are an enabler of many other goals in Agenda 2030. So the role of SDG 12 and sustainable consumption and production in addressing key environmental and social concerns and supporting the achievement of an integrated delivery of Agenda 2030. So this is really to start with a perspective of what is the starting point in terms of the taking stock at midterm and the development of the strategy. And in relation to this also, through this taking stock, it was also a moment for the whole One Planet Network to really reflect on who we are and identify the three main things that we all can leverage and can talk about when discussing a membership of the One Planet Network. So first and foremost, an implementation mechanism of Sustainable Development Goal 12, and as affirmed by Target 12.1, and of course as an overarching target of Goal 12. The second one is we are a multi-stakeholder partnership for sustainable development. So of course, through the different stakeholder groups that are part of this network. A multi-stakeholder partnership for sustainable development was also recorded in Goal 17 of Agenda 2030 as a key means to implement Agenda 2030. And finally, the third point is on who we are. We're a network that leads the shift to sustainable consumption and production. We provide both unified and coherent direction on sustainable consumption and production, and we provide the tools and solutions. And you will see many of these things which will come out of the presentation we'll be walking you through. How do we achieve this? Through the 6 thematic programs of which many of you are members. So the System of Food Systems, Lifestyles and Education, Buildings and Construction, Consumer Information, Tourism, and Public Procurement. These 6 programs, which are really the thematic breakdown of SCP to a certain extent, and the accelerators within the field of sustainable consumption production. And then always on the note of who we are and who is the One Planet Network, I think these were also some of the fundamental considerations in the taking stock at midterm. Many of you know this slide very well and know very well the multi-stakeholder composition of the network. It was very important to keep in mind throughout this discussion the representation of the different stakeholder groups, of course, whether it's the business and private sector, national government, scientific institutions, civil society and NGOs, or international organizations. And again, within this One Planet Network, beyond the 6 programs which I've already mentioned as accelerators in sustainable consumption production, then we also have a number of other groups that really can support us in moving forward the shift to sustainable consumption and production. One key group are the national focal points, some of which are also on this call. And the national focal points, the 130 national focal points, are really our anchor within national implementation. And if we think back to the slide we just saw on our role within the 2030 agenda, of course, SDGs are implemented at national level. So the national focal points are really the anchor of a lot of the work that we're doing through the thematic program. And there are then, of course, the 22 UN agencies in the Interagency Coordination Group, which help with a coherent and coordinated approach across the UN system. So this said, this is like some of the basic starting points, as I mentioned, throughout the review at midterm. The midterm review was mandated in the document that was adopted at Rio+20 and which established the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production. In discussions with the board and the leadership of each one of the 6 programs, we defined 4 main blocks that would compose the midterm review. The first one on the progress reporting 2012-2017 across the whole One Planet Network, across sectors, across teams, across programs, and across organizations, and across regions, of course. So this is really to look at what have we achieved, what are some of the gaps, what are the trends that we can build upon in the next phase. The second block was composed of the independent external review. So here we had an external senior consultant that really looked at the NYSP with a fresh pair of eyes, somebody who'd never worked with us before, and really looked at what were some of the opportunities that we could leverage and some of the key gaps that we could jointly address in the next 5 years. So the third block in the midterm review then was the development of the strategy that we'll be discussing today. So the strategy was developed by a strategy task force composed of 15 members, which represented all of the different groups within the 10YP. So a representative for each of the program was on the task force, a representative of each one of the UN regions was on the task force, as well as representatives of the UN Interagency Group and so on. The strategy has now been finalized. Many of you have contributed also to and provided input at different stages of these processes through your representatives on the task force, and we thank you very much for that. It really helped in strengthening this strategy. And it has now been fully endorsed by the board, and it has been submitted to the high-level political forum. Last week, the board and the leads of the 6 programs met during the executive meeting and launched the implementation of the strategy. So the strategy is officially, let's say, has started its implementation. The fourth and last block in this midterm is really about the dissemination and visibility. Increasing the awareness around SCP. SCP is an enabler of the Agenda 2030, but also increasing awareness and political support to the work that each one of the organizations that are members of the One Planet Network are doing and how they're contributing to the delivery of SDG 12. And this is, of course, a part that we are starting now, picking up on the high-level political forum, which is the first big opportunity in which we have for dissemination and visibility. But, of course, then there are many other events within your own context, regions, and thematic areas. I will now hand over to Sophie to talk to us a little bit more about the first block of this midterm review, and in particular the progress report.
Thank you, Cecilia. So I'll be talking to you about, as Cecilia mentioned, the progress reporting, the background for understanding what is happening globally in terms of the implementation of sustainable consumption and production practices. The indicators of success is the monitoring and reporting framework that was created by the MNE, the Monitoring and Evaluation Task Force of the One Planet Network. It was created in order to measure and inform the network about the progress on SCP, what are the areas that we are strong in, what are the areas that we need to improve in, what is happening in terms of sustainable consumption and production within the network, but also globally. What the framework focuses on is output level, outcome level, and impact level of activities. I won't go into much depth about the different indicators right here because we'll go into them in more detail when we do a little bit of analysis further into the presentation. Just to show you what we can use the progress reporting for. So the progress reporting at midterm, so that's 2012 to 2017, is the work and the efforts of the 700 plus partners of the network implementing over 1,800 activities. And we see everything from outreach and communication activities and knowledge resources and technical tools and a lot of policy instruments. And we're starting to see, as the reporting goes on year, we're starting to see more and more of the performance and outcome level indicators such as integration into education, establishment of monitoring and reporting instruments and actual changes in practices, as well as more and more high-level commitments towards the network and towards sustainable consumption and production. But we can also drill down more into this data, and we can look at it from different angles. And one angle we can look at it from is the thematic areas of the program. To understand better what is happening specifically within the network of the different programs, and see in which direction should the program develop to more efficiently support governments and international organizations, national organizations, other stakeholders in implementing and shifting to sustainable consumption and production. As an example of this, if we look at the slide right here, we see that a program like Sustainable Public Procurement are doing a lot of knowledge resources and technical tools and guidelines to support their partners such as policymakers and practitioners in shifting to sustainable public procurement practices. We also see that something like buildings and construction, they're doing a lot of outreach and awareness raising in order to ensure that sustainability and sustainable consumption and production in relation to the built environment is understood more sufficiently and properly at a global level, as well as at a national level with on-the-ground implementers. For lifestyles and education, we see something like training as a big component. Obviously, they have there a lot of training on changing your lifestyles and ensuring that young people are adapting to a more sustainable lifestyle. We'll go into more detail on some of these things a little bit later on as well.
Thank you, Sophie. So then the independent external review, what did the independent external review tell us? So first of all, it was quite a comprehensive exercise. The external reviewer did a comprehensive desk review of all the documents available on the One Planet Network. There was an online survey to the entire network, to which many of you responded, which looked at really what, in your perspective, are some of the opportunities and the challenges, or the lessons learned over the first 5 years. There were also a set of targeted interviews, and the report was completed and was shared with all of you through one of the monthly updates. I think it was the May monthly update. And if you're interested in reading the whole set of recommendations, I encourage you to look at that document. But just to summarize it a little bit, what were the 4 key things that this independent external review highlighted? So first, 2 things to build upon and really to leverage in the next 5 years. So one of them, the key strength and the key achievement maybe of the first phase was really the establishment and the consolidation of the multi-stakeholder network. And this shouldn't be underestimated. It's the reason why we're here, and it's a challenge. It's difficult. We wouldn't be here if it were not difficult. And I think this is something that we really should all, in a way, congratulate ourselves for, to be able to be part and have contributed to the establishment of this network. And we should leverage that achievement because it does have the potential to be transformational in the context, in particular, of SDG 12. The key opportunity that we can build upon over the next 5 years. So the external reviewer really highlighted the inclusion of Goal 12 in the 2030 agenda. So if you think of the first slide, maybe this is not necessarily, does not necessarily come as a surprise, but we should also remember that when the CNYC was established in 2012, we didn't have Agenda 2030 yet. So a lot of things started before even the Sustainable Development Goals were put in place. And the inclusion of the 10-year framework of programs in Agenda 2030 as the only initiative explicitly referenced in Agenda 2030 gives us both an opportunity and a mandate around that, and it also gives us, of course, a responsibility to ensure that we can support the implementation of this goal. Two other points, on the other hand, to be addressed that the external reviewer highlighted. So first, the key weakness that the reviewer identified was the lack of overarching strategic objectives and of strategic priorities and clear outcomes for the whole network. This was partly addressed, of course, through the development of the indicator framework that Sophie just presented to you, but then, of course, was further addressed by the development of the strategy. So the review really recommended that we should have a strategy, and the strategy should be clear, and this is what then the strategy task force has been working on. And as a key challenge in the broader context, on the other hand, was identified as being the slow and fragmented action on sustainable consumption and production. And this is why we are here, to address this fragmentation and bring it all together on the shift to SCP and SDG 12. So before both the progress reporting that Sophie just highlighted and this independent external review, we informed the strategy task force during the strategy development. So all of the progress reporting and the recommendations made by the reviewer were taken into account by the task force in the development of the strategy, and you will see a number of things reflected in this strategy. And in looking at both these aspects, and of course looking also outside in the bigger world, outside of the One Planet network, what is happening, we identified around 8 key recommendations that are really the basis the basis for the strategy development. So through both the reporting and the midterm review, what were the key trends and recommendations? What are the key things that we really looked at within the task force in terms of building the next 5 years? What does the data tell us? So I mean, you heard Sophie mentioning before the 1,800 activities that most of you have reported on and provided the information on what's happening within your organizations, within your countries, and within your fields of work on the shift to SCP. And one thing that we really identified was what were the top things that have been reported by the network? So outreach and communication, knowledge resources and technical tools, policies and policy instruments. The conclusion that the strategy task force derived from this is that in the first phase, we really focused on creating the enabling conditions for the shift to SCP. We supported the SCP readiness in terms of making sure that the environment in which we are working at enabled us to move forward. In terms of the activities that were reported, we saw, as Sophie mentioned, increasingly we see activities being reported around changes in practices or coordination mechanisms or the actual implementation side. But of course, this can only be done once the enabling conditions have been established. So maybe after the first 5 years in which we focused on the enabling conditions, we can now focus on really supporting the implementation and making sure that the changes and the impacts that we're all working on actually take place across the organizations and countries we're working. And I think we'll look at a little bit more in depth at the three top activities that were reported. So I will look at first at the policies that were reported. So the policies were reported by many of you through the One Planet Network reporting exercise, and were also reported by the national focal points in terms of the official SDG 12.1.1 reporting, which focuses on national policies on SCP. So through this data, which we collected over 303 policies and policy instruments, we really could see a significant increase in the number of policies on SCP or SCP-friendly policies in this case over the last 10 to 15 years. And again, so thinking about the next 5 years within the strategy task force, we considered, so do we need more policies, or maybe should we think about helping and supporting the implementation of these policies? And if we don't need more policies, should we also consider then the aspects of policy coherence? If you think of it, these 303 policies that were reported, in particular under the pilot reporting on SDG 12.1, were reported by approximately 70 different countries. So there is a wealth of policies on SCP. So one of the key conclusions of the strategy task force was really to say, well, if these policies are there, maybe the part where we can bring the most added value is really in supporting their implementation.
Thank you. I'll talk a little bit about a few of the other key recommendations where we're diving a little bit more into the data. So Cecilia mentioned we need to move more towards, from developing the SCP readiness and the platform to move forward, we need to move into now supporting the actual implementation. And how do we do that then within the specific type of activities that we see happening across the network? So looking first at the development and application of knowledge resources and technical tools. As we can see by the data, and as Cecilia mentioned, we have a wealth and a large variety of knowledge resources and technical tools that have been developed across the entire network. But we're seeing very little, only 12% of these have reported information on the use of these knowledge resources and tools. So we're seeing sort of a gap in the actual application and implementation of the knowledge resources and tools in order to shift to sustainable consumption and production practices. So the recommendation of this made by the Strategy Task Force is essentially to focus the next 5 years on fostering the application of existing knowledge resources and technical tools, as well as working obviously to update and co-create further knowledge resources and tools to keep building this readiness base. Another recommendation that was made based on the taking stock on SCP across the network was focused on the communications and outreach activities. So communication and outreach, as you probably saw before as well, is the most reported activity across the entire network. However, what we see as well is that one of the least reported some of the least information we have is regarding high-level commitments. And so we're seeing sort of a gap in, we have a lot of outreach and communication material, we have a lot of events happening, we're participating in a lot of side events, we're doing a lot of campaigns, we're doing a lot of consultations, but we're not really seeing that manifest in terms of actual commitments of governments and international organizations towards shifting to sustainable consumption and production. So there are three key things that the recommendation from the taking stock from this reporting to the strategy. There are three main recommendations. One is that communications in the next 5 years needs to focus on demystifying SCP and making it understandable and relatable to all the different types of target audiences that we have. The second one is positioning SCP as an integrated approach to the Sustainable Development Agenda and to Agenda 2030. The third one is mobilizing the necessary political support for the shift to SCP. That's at all levels, both within the UN and at international level through the global agendas, but also at national level and local levels. The fourth recommendation that went through is regarding dissemination and identification of changes in practice. So changes in practices essentially offers tangible innovations and solutions in shifting to sustainable consumption and production with concrete and measurable impacts. So what we're looking at here is essentially what we as a network want to reach at the end, right? This is the goal that we have when we do sustainable consumption and production. This is the shift itself. So what we want to see reported here and what we want to see and hear that the network is doing is actually taking all of these tools and solutions, all of this training and capacity development, and turning it into actual changes into new technologies, changes in processes, in systems on the ground. We can already see this happening. As you can see here on the slide, we have 88 changes in practices being implemented. Over 300 governments and other organizations are doing this already. And we have 13 integration of SCP into formal education. This is happening. It's primarily happening, as we can see in the network, within the business sector. And this is another recommendation that has been put forward to the strategy task force regarding the engagement with the private sector and the business sector. So the private sector is where we see most of these solutions actually being implemented on the ground and resulting in concrete net positive impacts. So building on that within the network and building on that engagement is going to be important for the next 5 years. Looking at the fifth recommendation, which is related to the coordinated action of the network at the country level. Currently, what we've seen the last 5 years is that we have a lot of global activities. We have a lot of activities that are focused on the global SCP readiness building, in that sense, across the network. As we mentioned before, what we want to move towards is the implementation at national level. And to do so, the network will focus over the next 5 years, as per this recommendation, on ensuring that core activities are linked very closely with the national level implementation. And in doing so, fostering the willingness and the ideas to do the same in what we call affiliated activities, so the activities happening by the partners of the network, contributing to the objectives of the network. This includes also, of course, the involvement of key stakeholders within our network, such as the national focal points, and the UN interagency group and their connection to the UN country team. So this is essential in the national implementation. The last thing I'm going to go through before I hand back to Cecilia is about quantifying and demonstrating impact and benefits of sustainable consumption and production. This is key in order to build a strong narrative and a strong story around the impact of sustainable consumption and production, and in heightening it at an international level. The monitoring and evaluation or monitoring and reporting framework that I presented a little bit earlier has a whole section just on impacts, and we're looking at environmental impacts, resource efficiency, and human well-being, all 3 areas of sustainability. As you can see, currently we're capturing mostly environmental impact and resource efficiency. This is showing sort of a gap in the understanding of the social aspects of sustainable consumption and production, and how sustainable consumption and production is actually an enabler for the entire Agenda 2030. One thing that's very important when we talk about impacts is we cannot talk about impacts just in terms of number of activities that has this impact. What we need to be talking about is putting it in the context of the bigger global agendas, and putting it in the context to scientific-based evidence, and working together with recognized scientific institutions and bodies such as the International Resource Panel or the Life Cycle Initiative or the IPCC to understand, okay, what the network is doing, what is it that we're actually contributing to, and what changes are sustainable consumption and production making in terms of impact and the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you, Sophie. So then also keeping an eye out on what is happening beyond, of course, the One Planet Network. We also, the strategy task force also looked at the reforms that are currently ongoing within the UN system led by the UN Secretary General. And one of the things that they've done is really look at how the different Sustainable Development Goals are being supported. And out of these assessments and recommendations, what was highlighted was really that on the one hand, there's that SDG 12 is currently covered in a fragmented way, beyond, of course, the One Planet Network at a global level by the UN Development System, by organizations and countries. And that SDG 12 is one of the least resourced SDGs in Agenda 2030. So one of this was also further confirmed by the external independent review that we had, which identified the work of the One Planet Network as drastically resource constrained. So one of the recommendations that came out of that, and came out of actually the Secretary General, the UN Secretary General's report, is to strategically use pooled multi-partner trust funds as a way to create coherence, as a way to resource these goals, and as a strategic entry point for channeling financial resources and really catalyze the support of the delivery of SDG 12. SDG 12 as a transversal goal for an integrated delivery of Agenda 2030. So this is also a key recommendation that the strategy task force took into account during the strategy development. And maybe as a final point on all of the work that went into the taking stock, is we really looked at mobilizing the operational multi-stakeholder partnerships. So many of you may have heard reference to multi-stakeholder partnerships in a number of contexts. It's identifying the means of implementation by Goal 17, SDG 17, and we have an operational multi-stakeholder partnership. We've built this over the first 5 years, and this is, especially in the context of Agenda 2030, we're probably one of the few, or one of the only ones that are able to have these lessons learned and experiences to share with other multi-stakeholder partnerships or to build upon for ourselves. Within Agenda 2030, other partnerships presumably will have a maximum lifespan of 3 years. We have 700 partners. All of you have been contributing to this taking stock exercise, to the work of the programs, and all of you are indispensable, of course, to implement this strategy. As Sophie has already highlighted, we have 1,800 tools and solutions across the network that we can offer in support of the implementation of SDG 12. So we have the organizations, we have the experience, we have the tools and solutions. So we are a ready-made platform to be able to really support the SDG 12. And I think that none of us within the network should underestimate the potential that we have in really delivering on this. And as we mentioned, and as Sophie mentioned, the importance of country-level action. We have 130 national focal points, and these are really our key allies in anchoring our work within the national context and in really ensuring that we are able to support the implementation of SDGs where they're being implemented, i.e. at national level. And then, as I've already mentioned, we have 5 years of experience that we can share within and beyond, of course, our network. So all of these things really fed into the strategy, and you will find all of these different recommendations on the different points of the strategy. The strategy has been shared with all of you, and if you've downloaded it or read it or at least looked at it, you should all be familiar with this first diagram, which summarizes the 4 key objectives of the strategy. So the strategy is 8 pages long. If you haven't read it, I really recommend that you have a look at it. As I mentioned, it will be up to each one of us as a member of the network to ensure that the actions identified in the strategy are taken forward and are implemented. It's also an opportunity for all of us to focus, to make choices. What the strategy has enabled is a prioritization. The SCP agenda is very broad, and that's what the strategy really tries to do, drill down to a few key things that we collectively could support. So the 4 objectives of the strategy, I'll go through them just to give a bit of an overview of what each one of these means. So the first one is about being an effective implementation mechanism for Goal 12. So what does that mean? It means monitoring the shift to SCP to identify emerging trends and key challenges. And you've seen this, we've done this, we've all done this through the progress reporting, and we've been able to identify trends and base a strategy on this. And I would say that in the context of sustainable consumption and production, we are the only ones that are capable of doing this at a global level, who have the information to be able to identify trends and challenges. It means supporting the implementation at national level, where the SDGs are being monitored, where they are being implemented. It also means the strategic use of pooled multi-partner trust funds, as I mentioned. And it also means leveraging key fora such as the high-level political forum in the context of SDG 12, of course, and then, of course, other events which might be highly important within the different areas that you're all working on. The second objective is really about providing the tools and solutions for the shift to SCP. So you've heard from Sophie, we've had approximately 400 tools across the organization, and a lot of the work over the next 5 years is really seen to be around first organizing and disseminating these knowledge and tools, making them accessible to organizations that wish to take forward actions on sustainable consumption and production. It's fostering the application of knowledge and tools, whether this is by providing advice, by providing technical assistance, or in certain cases also providing training. It's about identifying and promoting successful practices. So if you mentioned this, these are the changes in technologies, the changes in processes, the actions that each organization in the network is taking to really make the changes that have an impact on resource use or environmental impacts and social impacts. Identifying these will allow us then to replicate and scale up, whether within the same organizations or in different organizations that are members of the network. So really the basis for replicating and scaling up. It's also co-creating solutions and strategic gaps and strategic products where we have identified gaps. The third objective of the strategy is about leading the shift to SCP. So, as I mentioned, we at the moment are the only ones who are able to identify key trends, be able to identify key messages on sustainable consumption and production that are also messages across all of the stakeholder groups that are part of the network. So we are in a position to be an authoritative voice, a reference on the progress on the shift to SCP. We're also able to set the agenda, and we've seen this in particular in some of the programs. So the strategy, in a way, is an agenda setting. It's a way forward on SDG 12. The Sustainable Food Systems program adopted a resolution at the global conference in Pretoria last year. So there's a lot of aspects that have already started in this, but we really should take the point that we can collectively set the agenda on different parts of SCP. Related to that, it's also advocating for joint key messages on SCP. It's influencing national and international action. It's increasing awareness through different types of products and multimedia tools that we may have. And ultimately, it's about mobilizing the political support that we need both at national and international level to ensure that the shift to SCP is undertaken. The fourth and last objective is about demonstrating the impact of SCP. So we all talk about how SCP is an enabler of Agenda 2030. Can we really demonstrate this at the moment? Can we really show the links between the action on SCP and the impact? Not yet, but this is part of what we will be doing over the next 5 years. So really building, on the one side, being able to collect the data on the impact and link impacts to our actions, but also building the narrative around how SCP contributes to a number of other goals, or or how SCP helps address key environmental and social challenges. And this looks at both, as Sophie already mentioned, collecting data that is already available. When you in your organization change the technology, you will certainly be looking at how that changes the energy use, water use, or material use within the work that you do. And so that is data that is already available that we can build upon, both for demonstrating this link and building the narrative. It's also building on science-based evidence, so working with the organizations that have the science behind it. There are scientific and technical institutions within the network, as we have seen, and there are also scientific institutions that can really provide us with the global overview, for instance, on resource use, as the International Resource Panel. And the final point there is really also about jointly addressing strategic cross-cutting topics. So we have 6 programs, and this thematic dimension is very important because it breaks down the broad SCP agenda into specific topics that are more relatable. But there are also, across these 6 thematic areas, cross-cutting topics that we can all work upon and join forces around. I mean, there have been discussions on circular economy, for instance, but it can also be plastics or pollution and so on. And again, here, I think, as I say as a last word, in all of these objectives, and particularly in the advocacy side, I think that the importance of jointly addressing some of these actions is really important, because, of course, one thing is it's just an organization advocating for a key message. It's a completely different story if there are 700 organizations advocating for the same key message. So this gives you the overview of the strategy. I'll just add maybe a final point on how this is going to be taken forward. As I mentioned, this was really launched last week during the meeting of the program leads and the board. Each one of the programs it is expected that each one of the programs will integrate this strategy in its action plans, or in certain cases in the program strategy and so on. So you will be hearing more from your program colleagues on this. In the meantime, I would really encourage you to have a look and a close read of the strategy. The action points under the different objectives are fairly specific and actionable, and we will really count on the support of each one of you to implement this strategy effectively and be the reference for SDG 12. I think I'll stop here and open it up for any questions that you may have. So please feel free to chat in or unmute yourself or raise your, I see your hand raised, so we'll unmute you. So Antonia. Hello, Antonia? So we can't hear you for the moment. So while if you have any issues with the audio, please feel free to test it out and then unmute yourself in case it's resolved. Trina, I also see your hand raised.
Cecilia and Sophie, thank you very much for your presentation. Very comprehensive and very clear. Thank you very much for it. I would like to ask a question, but before I ask the question, I would like to say that the carrot and the stick, the carrot is very clear in the strategy, the stick is less clear because, for example, the standardization as a stick can be used in order to promote the implementation of the tools to demonstrate, in particular for construction products, sustainable usage of natural resources, and by doing that addresses the strategy which you very clearly explained. So another way of making progress through the implementation of the strategy is standardization, and that should be in a way or in another acknowledged. Mm-hmm. The question I want to ask is that we were speaking about resource efficiency, environmental impact, and human well-being, but if these are not related to the economics, the economic part of sustainability, it is very difficult for us to convince our research partner or our industrial partners or whoever we are working with in the implementation of the strategy that there is an economical benefit for them as well, not only competitiveness, but also money. And that should somewhere appear in the strategy. It has not appeared. At least I have not seen it, although I've read, of course, the strategy before this webinar, because obviously I wanted to be very informed about what we are discussing. I couldn't see the relation to the other pillar of sustainability, and that, I think, needs to exist.
Thank you very much for both your comments, and I fully agree. So on the first part, just to the part on implementing the carrot and stick and so on, this is the first time we have a strategy that goes across the network. So that's part of the effort in terms of standardizing. And as you might have seen in the strategy, there are key performance indicators for each one of the strategy objectives, and these will be reviewed annually. So there will be, in any case, across the 6 programs and across the network, an understanding of how we're implementing the strategy over the next few years. On the second point, I completely agree. It's not particularly visible. The place where it's probably most visible is in the reference to decoupling economic growth from environmental degradation. So it falls definitely under Objective 4 about being able to build the narrative. And as I mentioned, Objective 4 is and demonstrating the impact of SCP is something that we're not fully able to do yet, and that we will be working on, and definitely the economic benefits and the economic dimension will have to be part of that.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. If in this development you will need my help, please let me know. You might, I should have introduced myself. I'm a professor of sustainable built environment at the University of Bradford in the UK, but I also am developing the first sustainability assessment standard for construction product, which is noise barriers. And because I'm doing that, it will be a European standard. So that is the stick I was mentioning to it, because it will ask every single manufacturer producing noise-reducing devices for noise barriers to consider sustainable usage of natural resources. And by doing that, of course, meet all the sustainability key performance indicators, which will be included in the standard, including economics, of course.
We'll be definitely reaching out to you as we will work on these aspects of integrating some of the economic dimensions. So we've taken note.
Very happy to help.
So, Antonia, I don't know if your microphone is now working. We'll try to unmute you. Maybe try and give your questions, otherwise I'll read them out from the chat that you have. No, we still don't seem to be able to hear you, so I'll read them out. So your two questions is, how do you link circular economy with SCP? And the second question is, if countries already have a national program on SCP, do we respond to our own indicators of the programs, or do we respond to the indicators of SDG 12? So I'll start with the second question. The second question, so the answer to that one for the moment is, so in our indicator framework, we have integrated as many of the, well, all of the SCP 12 indicators. So they are embedded within our monitoring and evaluation framework, the indicators that you see in the strategy and that were developed by the task force. It's also this indicator framework is flexible in the sense that as some of the indicators under SDG 12 define their methodologies, because currently we only have two of the indicators that have their methodologies fully developed, we will adapt accordingly the indicator framework that we are using. So they should be one-on-one only, but of course there are developments that are coming about as the SDG 12 indicators get developed. On your question on circular economy with SCP, very good question. I guess a lot of the work around this is being done within the different thematic programs, which actually have identified this as a key cross-cutting topic. I'm not necessarily an expert on circular economy. I'd be happy for anybody else on this webinar call to make an intervention if they wish to on this, but it's something that you will be hearing more from the programs on. Oh, more questions. I see Justin and Gordon. Would you like to start, Gordon?
Are you speaking to me, Gordon Sillens?
Yes. Sorry, I'm using a first name because some of them are a bit complicated.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much. My name's Gordon Sillens. I work for the EcoTrans Network for Sustainable Tourism Development in Europe, and I've been following this process for quite a long time now. I would say 3 decades. And what I probably need to do is to just bring a question now about the overall strategy, because I find that in the year 2017 we're talking about sustainable consumption and production and the SDGs of 2030 as though this is something quite new. But we've been at this game for the best part of two and a half decades. When it was originally started as sustainable patterns of production and consumption. That was its original title. And when that was being used in the original Agenda 21 process, the idea of a peace-based economy was central to that idea. And with the 2015 changes and the introduction of peace and security into the process. I was wondering how far this strategy has really taken that on board as one of the main priorities for true international or national or regional sustainability. Because to me, the peace-based economy, as it was once called, is as important as the green economy, which seems to have become the focus of sustainable consumption and production as we see it today. And could you see how the strategy addressed that question?
Thank you for your question, Gordon. So I think we also perfectly, I mean, these are of course perfectly highly relevant questions and perfectly legitimate ones. I think there's also one of the things that I haven't been around since 2.5 decades on which you've been working on it. I've only been working on it more recently. And of course, sustainable consumption production, we are aware, is not necessarily new. What is new is Agenda 2030. What is new is having a multi-stakeholder network that is really working towards this. And what is new is, in this instance specifically, is having a strategy that helps us prioritize. SCP is such a broad agenda that we have to make certain choices. And I think this goes along also the second part of your question around the peace and security aspect. I think we have to make also certain choices. These aspects within the UN development systems in general are addressed under different, related but different pillars, so we'll probably take this one step at a time. And Justin, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but if you wanted to ask us a question, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Cecilia and Sophie, for a very good presentation, and thank you for representing the One Planet Network. I think it's fantastic. So this is maybe not a question, but a reflection. We are talking about to get this real change on the ground examples. My question is more, I've been traveling a lot around the world the last years and with this core initiative of sustainable food system. And in many places I meet really good examples. And the point of discussing with them, they don't need change. They need some incentive not to change. They need to be honored. So I looked into your reporting, I looked into your trying to find how should we honor, how should we see the real examples that are there now. So this is my reflection. How should we do that? How should we honor them, and how should we see them so that they don't do the change going in the wrong direction?
Yeah.
How do we report that?
Thank you. An excellent question, to the point.
Thank you.
This is exactly what we need to know, and this is part of one of the key challenges that we're facing. There is a lot of great stuff going on, and we don't necessarily know about it, and it's a little bit fragmented. It's over here, it's over there, and so on. And so this is what we're trying to do with the reporting: bring it all together and being able to identify these. To being able to use them for inspiration also on replication and scaling up, and also, as you said, by giving credit to the organizations that are already doing this. And the key entry point for this for us is the reporting system. It's an online reporting system that you may be familiar with. It should be relatively straightforward. So the first instance for us is really to encourage these organizations to, even if it's just one of the things that they do, report it, or the best one hopefully, or more than one if they can. These are then integrated in the databases. We use them as case studies, we use them in our official reports to the high-level political forum, and as we move forward with the new strategy, we may envisage other ways also to highlight these great cases. So the first entry point is the reporting, and after that we really look, it's something that we can also discuss within the programs and across the programs as to how do we best then highlight and give credit to the organizations that are already doing a great job on this.
Thank you for the reply, and I will certainly join you. Thank you.
So I see Rashid, you also have a hand raised?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Cecilia, for the good presentation. And I forward you, but the thing is, I'm new in this meeting. I didn't join you before. And I have only a request, not a question, to have some papers maybe I can review and know each and everything. And I forward you. Thank you very much. If I can get the presentation, either previous presentation and this presentation, and I can follow there and I can learn from you and something like that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rashid. So the One Planet Network website, so oneplanetnetwork.org, contains a lot of the information that we've talked about, from the reporting tools to what the programs are doing and so on. Then, of course, this specific webinar is being recorded and will be shared. The link will be shared with the whole network. And of course, then you have the latest reports. One of them is the report that we submitted to the High-Level Political Forum. And in the coming days, you will receive the midterm magazine, so a more communicable version of the report that maybe goes towards also what you're trying to just highlight, in which you try to highlight some of the good case studies that we've seen across the network at midterm. So these are all elements from which you can draw more information, and don't hesitate in contacting us.
Thank you very much for being fruitful for me and my organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Or questions or comments or suggestions? No? So if I don't see any questions, I think we've taken up a good part of this hour, and we've come to the end of this webinar. As I mentioned, this will be recorded and shared, and you will also be receiving the midterm magazine in the coming week. We look forward to working with all of you in implementing this strategy and taking it forward over the